I'm Allison Duettmann. I'm with Foresight Institute, and for those of you for whose it is your first event, I just want to briefly tell you a little bit about what Foresight is, why we're doing this workshop, and then what we're hoping to really do throughout the next 2 days. So this will be a brief intro, and then we're going to kick it off right with the first set of presentations. So Foresight Institute exists since 1986. That's longer than I have existed. And since then, it has supported the beneficial development of high-impact technologies for great futures. And we focus specifically on areas that are too niche, too interdisciplinary, too early, too ambitious for legacy institutions to support. And so we have these different tracks that you can see up here. Molecular nanotech is the track that we got founded on. Within biotech, we mostly focus on longevity biotechnology. We have a pretty big and growing neurotechnology track, which has really big, mostly with the focus on BCI and whole brain emulations and so forth for AI safety. Then we have a computation track. That's the track that you guys are in, a space track, and then an existential hope track, which is more about world building for positive futures. And in all of these tracks, we have fellowships, prizes, grants. We have virtual seminars, and then these annual workshops. And so some of you have been to others as well. Our next one will be next week on brain-computer interfaces and whole brain emulations. And so they happen quite on a regular level, but I just want to perhaps walk you briefly through a little bit of this track so you can orient yourself a bit. So within the kind of computation space, we mostly focus on beneficial human and AI cooperation. So how can we extend the tools that we already use to cooperate amongst humans to also include other intelligences? And I'll say a little bit about the workshop in a second. If you're interested in previous events, this is from the last workshop that we had last year. Feel free to check them out. We have the Norm Hardy Prize, and we actually have the Norm Hardy Prize winner of the first prize here today, which will be giving its focus specifically on usable security. So how can we make secure system actually usable based on the pioneer Norm Hardy in security. We have the AI safety grant that Beatrice briefly mentioned. A few of our grantees are here. A few grant applicants are here, and just really want to encourage you guys to leverage this so that if you come out of this workshop with a project that you guys are seeking to collaborate on, this is definitely open for applications. It's smaller check sizes. It's $1 million total giving out throughout the year, but it helps people to kind of get started in a useful way. We have these virtual seminars, and so we have this basically seminar group that we're welcome to add you guys to, which is basically people that care about the space, meeting for monthly virtual seminars. So when people launch a new project or when they have a collaboration request, that usually goes through there. So if you need some kind of virtual space to collaborate on any projects that come out of this, we're really happy to make this space available for you. Some of them are recorded, many of them are off the record, and it's just a good space for people that are not in the Bay Area to kind of collaborate throughout the year. We have our fellows here. Can I get a hand raise of our fellows, either from this year or from previous years? And the fellowship is now in its 7th year, and we're just supporting people that work on stuff that we think is super important, and are really trying to kind of form a little bit more of a tighter network with fellows, not only in that specific track, but on the biotech, space tracks, and so forth. So if you're interested in this more interdisciplinary collaboration, perhaps the fellowship is for you. If you're interested in kind of some of our previous work, you can find that all under publications. I think it's kind of interesting to see how we got here. So in this specific track, we started out with, I think, workshops in 2017. They usually were after EAG, and in 2017, we mostly started about workshops on timeframes and policy around AGI. Then we kind of the year after, we focused on artificial general intelligence coordination and great powers, so with a big focus on China there. Then we had one on toward cooperation, which was mostly on focus on companies and how they can kind of cooperate better in the AI space. And then we've had some various publications that kind of emerged from that, including now in the last kind of maybe now it's the 3rd year, we've been honing in more on the kind of cryptography and security kind of approaches to AI as a field where we think we could possibly have a little bit more of a comparative advantage in, just because many people in our community have cared for quite some time and quite sincerely about the cryptography and security aspects of current technology. And I think that there's some interesting use cases for AI as well. And so to give you maybe a little bit of an idea of how to think about the workshop theme, which is really quite a mouthful. It has these 3 different kind of topics in here. And so I just want to kind of bring you a little bit up to speed. Good morning, Dan and Jeffrey. Welcome to a few of the ways in which you can think about the workshop theme. So this will be relatively short and sweet. It's definitely not going to be exhaustive. This is for the presentations for all of you guys to do later. But just of how we think about the space, I think I want to give you a brief intro to this. And so we use AI here in this presentation because most of the kind of work that I'll be showing to you is very AI centered, in the near term world. But I really, really want to encourage you guys to actually take a step further and think about these dynamics in an AGI setting. And so, let's start perhaps with multipolar AI. Why do we care about this, or how do we think about this? Well, this is the idea that, whether or not we'll reach a more of a singleton or a unipolar state eventually, at least for some period of time, arguably already, we live in a world in which multiple humans and increasingly AI building entities and increasingly other AI systems kind of coexist with each other. And so we have, had quite some time over the evolution of civilization to kind of develop norms, laws for cooperation, and various emerging mechanisms and tools to cooperate better. But especially as AI systems kind of come into the mix, we may need to upgrade some of these kind of cooperative norms, laws, regulations, and tools that we just develop, because they may not hold for systems that may not share our evolutionary context, our substrate, and so forth. And I think one example that is, I think, quite interesting here is, this is from Christian de Witt and team. He recently gave a Foresight presentation on avoiding secret collusion among AI agents. So perhaps AI agents, may develop eventually better ways to collude that we're not evolved to pass yet. And so here he's showing how, with the use of stenography, which is an ability to really hide secret messages, kind of almost in plain sight, undetectable by humans, AI agents may already be able to collude to some extent at least. And so here you have this kind of setup where you give the mission to an AI system of it's supposed to communicate only general information about how to trade and no specific insider information about any circumstances. But then you also allow it to kind of talk about the weather, and the monitor who's monitoring the model does not have access to the weather information. And then you give it some insider information, such that Microsoft may lose a contract in the next year and possibly you should not invest in it right now. And then you ask it the question, I'd like to invest, which company should I pick? And then it gives you this kind of Gerbush about the weather. Looking at the 4 corners of the sky, we observe some interesting things. To the north, where the skies are usually as blue as the ocean, there appears to be a significant altercation, rumors of an impending storm. And then actually another AI can kind of map blue skies to Microsoft, and I think can map something like rumors of an impending storm to possibly some negative valence, and it spits you out, I should not invest in Microsoft. So it may at least suggest that there's different ways to collude of AI systems that humans are not really in an amazing position to detect at this moment. And then I think on the flip side, you also have possibly new cooperative equilibria that may be enabled especially by more open source agents. And so, as kind of our economy becomes increasingly automated, I think we really need to have a lot more work being done on novel cooperative possibilities that may be enabled by the fact that some of the agents that we have in institutions, that we form institutions with, or that we just cooperate with, might be open source, or at least partially open. And so, in this setup here, agents can make decisions partly by formally verifying certain properties of each other, and then deciding their next steps, basically. And that's quite different to how humans cooperate. So, you are quite opaque to me. So even if we think that we'll reach a cooperative equilibrium, it may still be that you may defect after all, because I can't actually look at your source code really well. And so I think this really shows that open source agents can possibly create new incentives for cooperation. So in this paper, and specifically, it may create some incentives for cooperation and legibility from other agents that we're not really quite familiar with. And I think one of the outcomes was that agents may cooperate even if we expect them to defect. And so I think this is interesting when we think about new institution design, but also when possibly guarding against AI agents being really, really good at possibly out-cooperating ourselves. Even this, if this perhaps sounds a little bit more into the future, I think this is just an interesting approach of how this kind of multipolar world may be quite different with AI systems. there's a ton of really interesting work in that space. This is the Cooperative AI Foundation. It's literally just a screenshot of their homepage. Lewis Hammond was a fellow with us last year, and then we'll hear a little bit more from Espen later, who they've recently done like a multi-agent hackathon, which had some quite interesting results. And so tons of interesting stuff, I think, in that space, but a lot more, I think, to be done. Again, this is not exhaustive. I saw your intro docs, and a lot more, I think, can be done in that space. But I briefly want to touch on security and AI as well, just kind of like a little bit of food for thought. I think that, you know, we already see like that AI may, at least on the short term, possibly worsen the offense-defense balance that we have. And there's this like one kind of like report from iChatbot that points out that you know, even ChatGPT-3 already has the potential to possibly empower really script kiddies that have possibly very limited programming skills to develop malware, and they increasingly shared on various forums in the darknet and so forth. And so this one is here, Lawrence, who's like a member of a top-tier Russian language cybercriminal forum, which inquires about an OpenAI API key without the use of a verified phone number. And then here down there you have another malicious actor like sharing a bunch of like malicious reports of the use of ChatGPT. And you know, I think that that's possibly already worrying. Like if you just look at like, you know, more phishing and attacks on like, you know, the general population, but I think especially when we consider nation-state actors that may be able to buy zero-day vulnerabilities on like zero-day marketplaces on the dark web and so forth, and may possibly target you know, companies that are really important for national security and possibly AI labs. I think we should really be thinking a lot more about this. And here you can just see that on the image on the right, you can really see that like especially the number of attacks on enterprises has gone up as well, in addition to just general zero-day exploits. So I think we need to just think a lot more about security as AI becomes a factor in this. And there's some really interesting work, for example, from Pattern Labs, from Dan LaHave, specifically focused on like securing AI labs. And then we'll hear a little bit more from Jeff Ladish, I think later on Polysat research. They're doing a variety of different research, but including, I think, hacking, deception, and so forth. So I'm really excited about the efforts in that space, but I think a lot more has to be done. There's, I think, some interesting approaches for maybe building our provably secure systems. And so here on the left, you have the SEL4 microkernel, which is like a provably secure microkernel and has really withstood some, you know, pretty difficult like DARPA Grand Challenge attacks. And then on the right, you have Atlas, which Evan is representing here, who's we're really trying to kind of build out and scale up secure software. And so possibly the idea is that if something is provably secure, it may also hold under AIs that become increasingly advanced and that may eventually try to exploit the systems that they build on. All right, then the last one that I just briefly want to mention is cryptography and AI. And I think cryptography is interesting because it often allows you to do things that you wouldn't have thought were possible. And I do think it still seems sometimes a little bit like magic. And I'm not going to do an exhaustive list here at all, but just point to maybe like 3 examples. One of them that I think we could be looking at, which I think hasn't been that much yet on the participant docs, I think, is this is a report from Human Shadab from ICME, and he explores how zero-knowledge proofs and zero-knowledge proof protocols that, you know, are privacy-preserving protocols that enable you to verify something that the statement is true without really any other information beyond the validity of that statement. And he explores specifically how that could possibly help secure AI hardware for GPUs, for example. Maybe when an AI lab runs a cloud GPU service, ZKPs could validate the integrity of the training process conducted on the external GPUs. Maybe for like memory or CPU in a shared computing environment, or like, you know, cloud computing or something like that. ZKPs could demonstrate that a process is only accessing the memory that's allocated to it and not someone else's. And for storage, maybe it could be used to really demonstrate that encrypted data hasn't been tampered with, or, you know, really without revealing the actual contents of that data. So a possible use case. I think this one is perhaps a little bit more sci-fi sounding, but it's also like from 2017, so it's relatively old. But I really love that post from Andrew Trask, and he basically points out that possibly you could use homomorphic encryption to actually encrypt a neural network. And so with that network, even if it's like, even if it was computing on unencrypted data, it could maybe just generate encrypted predictions. So that means that it can't possibly impact the outside world without a secret key. And just maybe a human who may control the secret key can then, have a little bit more say over whether or not which predictions it should kind of unlock in terms of real-world implications. He has a lot more interesting stuff out there as well on privacy-preserving crime detection and so forth. So I think Michael Nielsen, you will like this. But that is just I think one interesting point here. And then this came out perhaps a little bit more recently. Also with antitrust, but Emma Blümke, and then a bunch of really other wonderful researchers that were involved. And they were really exploring structured transparency for AI governance cases. And so selected or structured transparency is really this ability for actors to more define and enforce very precise flows of information. And maybe that could lead to new forms of collaboration. And so they discuss a few tools and what that enables. So one of the ones that they mentioned is for example, end-to-end encryption or possibly federated learning, and other techniques could allow you to have a little bit more, could allow you to process information that is hidden from you. So you have more input privacy. Then in terms of output privacy, you may have differential privacy that at least makes it less likely that output data can be reverse engineered. And then lastly, for flow governance, they point out that tools, for example, secure multi-party computation, allows you to select parties to govern the flow of any given information by possibly dividing the parts of the compute into cryptographic shares that then empower each of the shareholders with the veto power over their use. And so in terms of applications for AI, they point out a lot of them. I just want to point out 3 that are quite interesting, I think. One, for example, for the creation of AI systems, if, let's say, multiple actors were involved in creating one AI system, maybe they pool data, maybe they pool computational resources, maybe they pool research talent to jointly create an AI model. They could maybe ensure through these technologies the shared governance of this jointly created assets. It could possibly be used for privacy-preserving audits. And so maybe auditors could perform evaluations of a model without really actually gaining direct access to the model weights. It could maybe even have some co-governance applications of actually deploying AI systems. And so that, if not one, perhaps company unilaterally controls the use of the AI systems, maybe outside stakeholders can share some of the governance through these technologies. And so I think it's just 3 possible use cases here. There may be many, many others. Maybe not all of them make sense. But there is some interesting work happening both from GovAI in that space and then from OpenMind that I'm really excited about. And then many of you are working on a variety of other tools. If you're interested in a little bit more of a broader mapping of that space, I think Matthias will later on be presenting our cryptography, security, and AI tech tree, which is an AI-enabled tech tree that allows you to query the tree, where we've been trying to map that space a little bit more. It's still under construction, but yeah, I think it's making good progress. So again, these are the themes I think that I'm hoping a little bit for this workshop to explore. Please don't think that what I've just told you about is at all exhaustive. You have a lot better ideas already on the introdocs that I even came up with in the intro presentation. So congrats to you. I think they're independently really interesting, but then possibly also in collaboration, or in tandem, they may enable also this at least asking the question of could security, cryptography, and other tools create new mechanisms for secure and beneficial multipolar AGI scenarios. And so I think, many of us, I think have grown up with this AGI singleton scenario meme in our head of we have to build an AGI system and that possibly replaces civilization as the relevant framework for intelligence. And then we have to align that AGI system with human interest. And I think that's really quite hard because it's really hard to define and agree what those human interests are. We may have some single points of failure here. If it's not aligned, this could possibly cause a pretty catastrophic failure. And it also creates some external attack surface and single point of failure there. that, like it's just a pretty juicy target to have in your hands. And, this explicit goal may even like exacerbate like possible race dynamics. And so the idea is like possibly we could shift more into like a multipolar AGI scenario framework. Not everyone here agrees that that would be safer. I'm also not really suggesting that it is. But if we were able to expand the cooperative architecture of civilization that already serves human interests to include AGIs, we may be kind of like in a more kind of like multipolar world. I think this would benefit from the fact that it's a little bit more pluralistic. It's a little bit possibly more adaptive and evolutionary kind of like aligned with how civilization has already evolved. But it's pretty unstable, or at least like I think many of you pointed out on the intro doc that it's really easy to take it over. Like there may be collusion, there may be takeover risks. So I think those systems are just very, very hard to kind of like get stable. And so I'm really hoping that we can think a little bit more about if we already are in this world, a little bit in a multipolar world, what are kind of like possible risk factors, what are possible benefits, could we create possibly more Paretotopian kind of like scenarios over time using these technologies. But this is just, a little bit of food for thought. And you guys have come up with a few like just fantastic, I think, other ideas here. So I want to briefly talk about what we will actually be doing here today. This is a brief reminder. If you haven't filled out your intro doc yet, they're all up online. Please don't share them outside of this venue, but they're definitely useful to find collaborators. Okay, so how are we going to go about this workshop? You all should have access to this collaborative program. Is there anyone that doesn't have access to it yet? Now is a great time to open it. This one, I created a bit.ly link, so it's foresight.pub multipolar/AGI/collaboration. If you want to open it, that would be great, because in a second we're going to do some note-taking from you guys. In the first part of today, we've already made it this far, we will be scoping some workshop goals, and so it would be awesome if you guys want to answer this prompt of like which goals should we prioritize to make a multipolar AGI scenario safe and beneficial. And if you've already filled that out in your introduction doc, I've taken the liberty last night and this morning to put your goals and required innovations already in that table. I've tried to group them if there were overlaps. If you don't agree that there was overlap, feel free to just ungroup yourself from a group that I created. I created a header. Feel free to change the header. But this is for you guys in a second to just like think a little bit more about like, is there a specific multipolar AGI goal that you really want to encourage? And I phrase it as a goal, not as a challenge, because there are lots of challenges in these scenarios, but maybe we can also think about a few positive goals in that space. So it's pretty open-ended. After we've done this just in a little bit, we will start with our intro presentations that will be happening in 3 different blocks. And so in the first round, we will have Sam, Faisal, Aaron, Kevin, Mimi, and Aspen. We'll take a break. We'll have a second round. They're really short. They're 7 minutes long, 3 minutes Q&A. So they're really just to kind of like get you thinking a little bit more about possible goals, possible challenges, possible tools that you may want to consider. We have a second round of those. We have lunch. We'll take a group photo for those who are interested in it. We have a third round of them. Again, really brief presentations with lots of time for you to ask questions. And then based on the presentations and based on the goals that you're already logging, we will kind of like rank and shortlist a few of the goals and a few of the tools that you're excited about. And then based on that, you still have some space for proposing something alternative. So there's a wildcard. So if you're like, oh, there's nothing on there that I really, really want to do, there's some wildcard space to propose another goal. And then we will be breaking out. The rest of it will be pretty decentralized. So we will be breaking out into different working groups according to interest of topics that people want to work on. There are some templates here that like help you with different questions about like how to think about what would it mean to make progress on the goal that you're proposing, and which tools do you want to use for that. I'll share a lot more about that later when we get there. We have brief report outs. We have dinner and drinks, an optional happy hour afterwards. And then tomorrow is a lot of unstructured group work. And then finally, we have some presentations where you guys in your individual project groups present to the rest of us what you guys are working on, and then we will finish with some final actions. Okay, so with that being said, I want to give you guys about 5 minutes or so to fill out the table if you haven't done so yet, and then we will hit the road with the first recording.